unearthed from the shadows of the 13th century. An ancient ring whispers secrets of a forgotten time. When a man inherits this cursed relic, he's hurled back to the harrowing days of the Black Death, trapped in a world ravaged by plague and despair. His only ticket home is stolen. Now he must navigate a labyrinth of terror and time, facing a fate more horrifying than death itself. Will he escape the clutches of the past, or become a permanent victim of history's darkest hour? Tune in and witness the chilling saga of the Ring of the Plagued Past. The rain pattered gently against the windows of the old study, where Daniel sat surrounded by stacks of musty books and artifacts, remnants of a life spent in pursuit of history's secrets. His uncle, Gerald, had been a man of peculiar habits and even more peculiar collections. It was in this room, amidst the lingering scent of aged paper and leather, that Daniel had spent countless hours as a child, listening to Gerald's tales of ancient civilizations and long-forgotten lore. Gerald had passed away 2 weeks ago, leaving his entire estate to Daniel. As his only living relative and a fellow history enthusiast, it seemed only fitting. The lawyer, Mr. Higgins, had been explicit. Everything in the old house was now Daniel's. Yet, as he sifted through the collections, a sense of unease crept over him. Gerald had always been a bit of an enigma, often disappearing for months on end, returning with new artifacts and wild stories about their origins. On the oak desk, among a pile of dusty tomes, Daniel found a small, ornate box. It was different from the rest of Gerald's collection. There was a certain air of mystery about it that piqued his curiosity. The wood was old, darkened by age, with intricate carvings that seemed to dance in the dim light. It was secured with an iron clasp, worn with time. Daniel hesitated for a moment before opening it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a silver ring. Its band was adorned with strange inscriptions, symbols that Daniel couldn't immediately place. It looked ancient, possibly from the mid-13th century, judging by the style. He recalled Gerald mentioning something about a family heirloom once, a piece said to be steeped in legend and mystery. Could this be it? As he picked up the ring, a chill ran down his spine. It felt heavier than it looked, and unnervingly cold to the touch. The inscription was in an old dialect, possibly Latin, but altered in a way that made it difficult to decipher. "Ah, you found the ring." Mr. Higgins' voice broke the silence, causing Daniel to jump slightly. The lawyer had been sorting through some papers in the corner of the room. "This was one of your uncle's most treasured possessions," Mr. Higgins continued, peering over his glasses at the ring. "He claimed it was from the time of the Black Death. A peculiar piece indeed. Gerald was always a bit secretive about where he got it, but he believed it held significant historical value." Daniel turned the ring over in his hand, feeling its weight. Did he ever mention anything specific about it? Any stories or legends? Mr. Higgins chuckled softly. "Your uncle had many stories, most of them more fiction than fact, I suspect. But he was adamant that this ring was special, said it was a symbol of survival, a reminder of the resilience of humanity in the face of great adversity." A symbol of survival, Daniel thought, gazing at the ring. Little did he know, it was a symbol of much more than that, a link to a past so dark and terrifying that it would soon engulf his very existence. With a mixture of reverence and apprehension, Daniel slipped the ring into his pocket. The legacy of his uncle's mysteries was now his to unravel, and this ring seemed like the key to a door that had long been closed. He couldn't shake the feeling, however, that some doors were meant to remain shut. That night, Daniel's sleep was restless, his mind a tempest of fragmented images and whispers from a bygone era. In his dreams, he wandered through shadowy streets cloaked in mist, the air thick with the scent of burning herbs and the distant cries of anguish. The world around him was a blur of medieval architecture, a labyrinth of narrow cobblestone lanes that twisted and turned into the unknown. He found himself in a scene of desolation. The Black Death, in its merciless fury, had turned vibrant marketplaces into ghostly arenas of despair. People in tattered clothes moved like spectres, their faces hollowed by fear and loss. Doctors, in beak-like masks, roamed the streets, their presence a grim reminder of the unrelenting plague. Amidst this chaos, a figure stood out, strangely familiar, yet out of place. It was his Uncle Gerald, dressed in the garb of the 13th century, his eyes reflecting a haunting knowledge of the horrors around him. Gerald looked at Daniel, a cryptic smile playing on his lips, as if he knew secrets that were yet to unfold. "Daniel," his uncle's voice echoed, ethereal and distant. "The ring is not just a relic, it's a bridge to the past, a witness to the resilience and the follies of mankind." The dream shifted, and Daniel found himself walking beside his uncle through the plague-ridden streets. They passed by scenes of unspeakable sorrow, families torn apart, bodies left unattended, and the constant tolling of church bells marking yet another soul lost to the pestilence. "Observe, learn, but do not interfere," Gerald warned, his voice barely above a whisper. "The past is a delicate tapestry. A single thread pulled can unravel the fabric of time." As they walked, Daniel noticed a peculiar detail. The ring on his finger glowed with a faint, otherworldly light, pulsating in rhythm with his heartbeat. It felt alive, almost sentient, as if it were an integral part of the scene around him. Suddenly, a sharp pain jolted Daniel awake. His heart was racing, and he lay in bed, drenched in sweat, the echoes of the dream still lingering in his mind. The room was dark, the only light coming from the moon casting eerie shadows across the walls. He looked at his hand. The ring, still in his pocket from the night before, seemed to beckon him. Daniel felt a surge of apprehension mixed with an unexplainable compulsion to put it on. It was as if the ring itself was urging him to unlock the mysteries it held. With trembling hands, Daniel retrieved the ring from his pocket. The inscription seemed to glow faintly in the moonlight, its cryptic letters a silent invitation to a journey beyond the confines of time. A sense of inevitability washed over him. Daniel knew that by putting on the ring, he was stepping into the unknown, possibly altering the course of his life forever. Yet, the allure of uncovering the secrets of the past, of experiencing history firsthand, was too strong to resist. With a deep breath, he slid the ring onto his finger. The world around him began to spin, the walls of his room blurring into a vortex of light and shadow. Daniel closed his eyes, bracing himself for what was to come, as he was pulled into the depths of history, to a time where the shadow of the Black Death loomed over the land. Daniel opened his eyes to a world transformed, gone were the familiar comforts of his room, replaced by the harsh reality of a 13th century street in the throes of the Black Death. He stood in a narrow, muddy lane, flanked by timber-framed houses with thatched roofs, their once vibrant facades now dulled and decaying under the weight of despair. The air was heavy with a mix of odors, the stench of death and sickness, the smoke from fires burning fragrant woods, and herbs in a futile attempt to ward off the plague. People shuffled past him, their faces drawn and weary, eyes hollow with loss. Some wore amulets or charms, superstitious tokens of protection against the disease that ravaged their community. As Daniel took in the chaotic scene, a group of flagellants passed by, their backs bloodied from self-inflicted wounds, believing their pain would appease God's wrath and end the plague. Their haunting chants filled the air, a grim soundtrack to the unfolding tragedy. Hesitantly, Daniel approached a woman who sat by the roadside, cradling a lifeless child in her arms. Her eyes, red from weeping, met his with a mix of grief and resignation. "Forgive me, sir," Daniel began awkwardly, unsure how to address her. "I am new to this place. Can you tell me what has happened here?" The woman looked up, her voice a weary whisper. "Pestilence, sir. It has taken my child, my husband, everyone I loved. It came like a thief in the night, sparing no one, rich or poor. The doctors say it's God's punishment for our sins, but what sin did my little one commit to deserve such a fate?" Her words painted a vivid picture of the societal and religious perceptions of the time, a belief that the plague was divine retribution, a sentiment that fueled both despair and fanaticism among the people. Daniel moved on, each step taking him deeper into the heart of the medieval city. He passed by a doctor in a beak-like mask, the beak stuffed with aromatic substances to ward off the miasma of the plague. The doctor was visiting a house marked with a painted cross, signifying that the occupants inside were afflicted by the disease. Further down the street, Daniel encountered a priest, clad in somber robes, offering prayers for the dead as they were loaded onto a cart. "Bring out your dead," the cart driver called out, a chilling reminder of the countless lives claimed by the plague. "Father, how does the city cope with such loss?" Daniel asked, his historian's curiosity mingled with a deep sense of sorrow. The priest sighed, looking around at the desolate streets. "We do what we can. We pray, we offer comfort to the dying, but it is never enough. The graveyards are full. We bury them in mass graves now. It is a time of great suffering, a test of our faith and humanity." As Daniel conversed with these individuals, the harsh realities of the period became starkly clear. The lack of scientific understanding of the disease, the rampant superstitions, and the overwhelming sense of helplessness that pervaded society. Standing amidst the chaos and despair of a world centuries removed from his own, Daniel felt an overwhelming sense of disconnection. He was a spectator to history's darkest chapter, a chapter he had only read about but was now experiencing in all its brutal reality. The weight of the ring on his finger was a constant reminder of the surreal journey he had embarked upon, a journey into the heart of the Black Death. Daniel, still reeling from the visceral experience of the 13th century, found himself back in the familiar surroundings of his modern home. The contrast between the two worlds was jarring. Here, in the comfort and safety of the 21st century, the horrors of the Black Death felt like echoes from a distant nightmare, yet the images of suffering and despair he had witnessed clung to him, a haunting reminder of the past's brutal reality. Sitting in his study, surrounded by books and artifacts, Daniel felt a profound sense of responsibility. The ring, now resting heavily on his desk, was not just a gateway to the past. It was a tool, a means through which he could potentially make a difference. But how? The question gnawed at him, a puzzle that demanded to be solved. Driven by a newfound purpose, Daniel began to reach out to friends, colleagues, and experts in various fields. He spent hours in discussions with historians, delving deeper into the specifics of the Black Death, its origins, spread, and impact on society. He learned about the lack of medical knowledge at the time, the superstitions that governed people's understanding of the disease, and the sheer helplessness of physicians in the face of the plague's devastation. Seeking a more scientific perspective, Daniel consulted with doctors and epidemiologists, explaining his interest as part of a research project. They provided insights into the nature of bubonic plague, the bacteria responsible for the Black Death, and discussed how advancements in medicine could have altered the course of history. Antibiotics, they explained, could have been a game changer, stopping the disease in its tracks. But the more Daniel learned, the more he realized the complexity of his endeavor. Any interference in the past could have unforeseen consequences, potentially altering the present in ways he couldn't predict. The ethical implications were staggering. Could he justify tampering with history, even with the best intentions? One evening, after a particularly intense discussion with a medical historian, Daniel sat alone in his study, the ring glinting under the lamp's light. The historian's words echoed in his mind. The Black Death was a turning point in human history. It reshaped societies, economies, and even religious beliefs. Altering that course, who knows what ripple effects that could have on the present? Daniel pondered the gravity of his situation. The power to traverse time was an incredible gift, but it was also a burden. With every journey to the past, he risked changing something, however small, that could ripple through time and alter the present in unimaginable ways. The ring seemed to beckon him, its inscriptions a silent call to action. Daniel knew he couldn't ignore it. The historian in him was too intrigued, the humanitarian too compelled to help. But he also knew he had to tread carefully, balancing his desire to help with the responsibility of preserving the integrity of history. As he picked up the ring, a sense of determination settled over him. He would return to the 13th century, armed with knowledge and a deep respect for the delicate fabric of time. He would observe, learn, and if possible, offer aid without disturbing the course of history. With the ring snug on his finger, Daniel closed his eyes and braced himself for the journey back. The world around him began to blur, and he was once again swept into the currents of time, heading towards a past plagued by darkness, but perhaps also ripe for a glimmer of hope. As Daniel materialized in the 13th century, the air was thick with tension and fear. He found himself in the midst of a chaotic scene unfolding in the village square, where a crowd had gathered, their faces twisted in anger and suspicion. At the center stood a woman, her hands bound, her eyes wide with terror. Accusations of witchcraft hung heavy in the air, a dangerous and all too common scapegoat for the inexplicable horrors of the Black Death. Daniel's historical knowledge painted a grim picture of what was to come. During times of crisis, especially in the era of the Black Death, communities often sought to find a tangible cause for their suffering. Witch hunts became rampant, with innocent people persecuted and blamed for spreading the plague through malevolent means. As the accusers shouted their charges, claiming the woman had brought the plague upon them through sorcery, Daniel felt a surge of horror and injustice. He knew he had to intervene to try and stop the madness. Pushing through the crowd, he called out, trying to reason with them. "Listen to me. This is not witchcraft. It's a disease, a natural illness. It's not caused by magical curses," Daniel pleaded, his voice desperate. His words, however, only fueled the crowd's hysteria. Eyes turned toward him, suspicion quickly morphing into hostility. "Another witch," someone shouted, pointing an accusing finger at Daniel. "He speaks in defense of the witch. He must be one of them." Before he knew it, Daniel was seized by rough hands, dragged to stand beside the accused woman. His heart pounded in his chest as he realized the gravity of the situation. He was now caught in the very hysteria he had tried to stop. The impromptu trial was a blur of shouts and accusations. Daniel tried to defend himself, to explain his presence, but his words fell on deaf ears. The concept of a disease-causing bacteria was far beyond the comprehension of the 13th century populace, and his attempts at explanation only incriminated him further. As the verdict of witchcraft was declared and the crowd's cries for justice grew louder, Daniel felt a sense of impending doom. He knew the horrific fate that awaited those labeled as witches in this era. In a moment of desperation, Daniel's hand went to the ring. He twisted it on his finger, the familiar sensation of time shifting, enveloping him. The angry faces around him began to blur, their shouts fading into a distant echo. And then, just as quickly as he had been transported to the past, Daniel found himself back in the safety of his modern-day study. He was panting, his heart racing, the terror of the near-death experience still gripping him. The realization of what had just happened hit him hard. His attempt to change the course of history, to save an innocent life, had nearly cost him his own. The dangers of meddling with the past were now starkly clear to him. The ring, while powerful, was not a tool to be used recklessly. Daniel sat in his study, the weight of his experiences heavy on his shoulders. He gazed at the ring, now lying innocently on his desk, its metallic surface reflecting the light of his lamp. It was a portal to the past, a connection to history's darkest moments. But it was also a reminder of the delicate balance of time. With a newfound respect for the power he wielded, Daniel resolved to continue his journeys to the past, but he would do so with caution, mindful of the consequences of his actions. The past could teach him much, but it was a realm to be navigated with care and reverence. Haunted by his narrow escape from the witch trials, Daniel understood that if he was to return to the 13th century, he needed to be better prepared. He spent the following days immersing himself in research, particularly focusing on the nature of witch trials during the Black Death. Historically, the witch trials of the 13th century were a product of fear, ignorance, and superstition. The Black Death, which ravaged Europe, left people desperate for an explanation. Without the knowledge of germs or how diseases spread, communities often turned to superstition, blaming misfortune and illness on witchcraft. Accusations of witchcraft were typically directed at those who were already marginalized, often women, the elderly, or the destitute. Trials were hasty and driven by hysteria, with evidence being largely anecdotal or coerced. Confessions were often extracted through torture, and the accused were rarely acquitted. The church and secular authorities endorsed these trials, seeing them as a way to reinforce their authority amidst the chaos of the plague. Equipped with this knowledge, Daniel knew he needed to be cautious. His modern sensibilities and knowledge could easily arouse suspicion, and he had to blend in to avoid drawing attention. Before his next journey, Daniel decided to rest, knowing the mental and physical toll the travel could take. He also gathered some essentials, a change of period-appropriate clothing to blend in, some basic medical supplies like bandages and herbs, common remedies of the time, and a small collection of coins from his uncle's collection, likely to be considered valid currency in the 13th century. As he lay in bed that night, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. He contemplated how he could make a positive impact without altering the course of history too drastically. Could he subtly introduce better hygiene practices? Could he provide medical care without revealing his advanced knowledge? The possibilities were endless, but so were the risks. The next morning, Daniel felt a sense of resolve. He dressed in the medieval garb he had prepared and looked at himself in the mirror. It was strange seeing himself like this, as if he was looking at a character from a history book, but it was necessary for his mission. Taking a deep breath, he picked up the ring, The metal felt cool against his skin, a familiar sensation that now filled him with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He slipped it onto his finger and closed his eyes, focusing on the 13th century, the streets of the plague-stricken town, and the people he hoped to help. The world around him began to blur, a now familiar sensation of time warping around him. When he opened his eyes again, he was back in the medieval town, the sights, sounds and smells of the 13th century enveloping him. Daniel stepped forward, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. He was back, but this time he was prepared. With a blend of caution and determination, he began to navigate the streets, ready to face the challenges of the past with the knowledge and resources of the present. The sudden impact on his head plunged Daniel into darkness. As he slipped into unconsciousness, he vaguely heard voices rifling through his belongings, the words, "Check his pockets," echoing in his fading awareness. He had been attacked, and everything he had brought with him was now gone. When Daniel awoke, it was to the cold, hard reality of the 13th century floor. The morning light filtered weakly through a nearby window, illuminating his surroundings. He felt a pang of panic as he realized that the ring, his lifeline back to the future, was missing. He wondered, with a sinking heart, why he hadn't been transported back when the ring was removed. Was it because it was now in someone else's possession? He heard the commotion outside, the sound of a gathering crowd. Peering cautiously out, he saw townsfolk dragging a woman to the town square. She was the accused witch, and they were taking her to be burned. Daniel's mind raced with panic and despair. He needed to find the ring, but first, he needed to hide and avoid drawing attention to himself. From his hiding place, Daniel watched the horrifying scene unfold with historical accuracy etched in every detail. The woman was bound to a stake erected in the center of a pile of wood, a grim and all too common sight in the medieval witch trials. The wood stack was strategically arranged to ensure a swift fire, a practice developed over years of witch burnings. The crowd, a mix of fear, anger, and morbid curiosity, gathered around, their faces reflecting the prevailing superstitions and collective hysteria of the time. A local priest was present, reciting prayers, which was typical in these executions. The church's involvement lent a sense of divine approval to the proceedings, reinforcing the belief that they were purging evil from their midst. The accused witch was given a chance to confess, though it was more a formality than a real opportunity for salvation. Her fate had been sealed the moment the accusations were made. As the executioner lit the fire, Daniel felt a wave of nausea and helplessness wash over him. The flames quickly caught, and the crowd's chants rose to a feverish pitch. The woman's cries were drowned out by the roar of the fire and the shouts of the onlookers. Daniel turned away, unable to watch the brutal end of an innocent life. He knew this was a dark chapter in human history, a time when fear and ignorance led to unimaginable cruelty. The execution served as a stark reminder of the dangers of the era he was in. Without the ring, Daniel was stranded in a time that was not his own, surrounded by suspicion and violence. He needed to stay hidden, to survive long enough to find the ring and return to his time. But as he hunkered down in his hiding spot, he couldn't shake the horrific images he had just witnessed, nor the haunting realization of the depths of human cruelty in the face of fear. As Daniel retreated from the horrific scene of the execution, a voice cut through the air, sealing his fate. "There's the other one!" a local cried out, pointing directly at him. Panic surged through Daniel as the crowd turned, their eyes alight with the same feverish mix of fear and zeal that had consumed the woman at the stake. In moments, he was surrounded and quickly subdued, unable to escape the grasp of the angry townspeople. "The witch's companion from the other day," someone shouted, Recalling his previous attempt to intervene, the accusations spread like wildfire, and Daniel found himself the focus of their frenzied accusations. A magistrate, a man of stern countenance and unyielding authority, pushed through the crowd. He eyed Daniel with a mix of suspicion and contempt, without a fair trial or a chance to defend himself. Both concepts almost non-existent in witch trials of the era. The magistrate swiftly condemned him. "To the stake with this consort of witches," he declared, and the crowd roared in approval. As they hastily built another stake, Daniel's mind raced in desperation. He tried to reason with them, to explain his true origin. "I'm from the future," he pleaded, his voice edged with panic. "I can help you. I know about this disease, how to stop it." But his words only fueled their fear and anger further. "He speaks madness, witchcraft," they cried. His knowledge of the future, meant to save him, only served to cement their belief in his guilt. Before long, Daniel was bound to the freshly built stake, the wood piled high around him. The executioner moved forward with a lit torch, and the crowd's chants reached a crescendo. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest, a mix of fear, regret, and disbelief at his impending fate. As the fire was set and the flames began to lick at the wood, a figure in the crowd caught Daniel's eye. A man stood there, wearing his ring, the same ring that had brought Daniel to this moment. The realization hit him like a wave. The ring had not been lost. It had been stolen, taken by someone who now watched him face his doom. He heard someone in the crowd speak to the man with the ring, calling him by a name that sent a shock through Daniel. It was his own surname. Could this man be an ancestor? Was this how the ring had been passed down through the generations? A family heirloom, shrouded in mystery and legend. The heat of the flames grew more intense, the smoke filling Daniel's lungs. He coughed, his eyes watering, as he strained to see the man with the ring one last time, but the smoke and the flames obscured his vision, and the faces in the crowd melted into a blur. In his final moments, Daniel's thoughts were a whirlwind of confusion, regret, and unanswered questions. The irony of his situation, a historian consumed by the very past he sought to understand, was not lost on him. His last thought was a fleeting hope that his story, his real story, might somehow survive through the ages, a cautionary tale of time, fate, and the unyielding march of history. And then, as the flames enveloped him, Daniel's world turned to ash, his story lost in the annals of time, a whisper in the wind, a past long gone. And if you're still looking to fulfill your thirst for more horror, don't forget to check out this next video. Unless, of course, you're frozen with fear already.